Thank yous are in order. I'm very happy to have been invited to come and share some of my work. I'll be honest that initially I was a bit apprehensive just because I'm really quite busy. I started a new job in November, and it's still taking me a long time to kind of get into the swing of things because I have to teach a lot, and these are all new courses to me. So I'm kind of always like 2 days ahead of the students, having to read about film and new media studies and that kind of stuff. So, but I eventually thought, yes, I kind of do want to talk to these people. I do want to talk to CNAP, if only because you guys were gracious enough to invite me to come talk about work in progress. And I actually have plenty of that. I also have work that is sort of needs to be finished or needs to be kind of find an output. For example, I'm in the process of trying to turn my doctoral research into a book, also with Amsterdam University Press. That has been parked just because I'm so swamped with teaching that I hope to get to it just before the summer. This talk that I'm giving today has sort of a different origin story, but I will get to that as well. My sort of goals, my aims for this talk is to kind of meander through some interesting literature and to pass by what might be provoking or interesting case studies, not just for me, but for you guys to pick up as well. This talk is kind of an offering. Like, if you think this stuff is interesting, then feel free to run with it. But also, if you want to run with it with me, then that is also perfectly fine. I'm happy to kind of collaborate or think about this stuff in more of a kind of a social configuration. Um, I know I've already been introduced, but I always like to kind of double say some things about myself as well. First of all, is that I have a website, so if you are interested in reading my work, most of it is linked on the website. I have a PhD in cultural studies, so I wrote my doctoral dissertation at the University of Oslo on the subject of Anthropocene temporalities in video games. This means I looked at climate futures, I looked at deep time, I looked at experiences of flow and stasis, and I looked at kind of temporalities of crises in video games. Formally, I'm trained in literary studies. That just means that I have a bachelor's and a master's in literary studies, though I've been kind of I've been doing video games since 2018. So that's really the field that I'm most comfortable in at the moment. Although I say video games, I'll include analog games as well, right? Role-playing games, specifically LARP. So in my time in Oslo, I was sort of introduced to this Nordic LARP community, which I really enjoyed. And it's a very inclusive, friendly community. So they invited, or I suppose, like they made it easy for people to start designing themselves, and that is what I started doing in 2019, 2020. I've been designing some LARPs. These are basically kind of like immersive or interactive theater games. The kind of LARP that I'm mostly familiar with is chamber LARP, which is these 3 to 4 hour kind of role-playing games that usually take place indoors in theater spaces, like black box spaces, or like classrooms. You know, if you don't have the theater room available. And they're specifically often designed to be played at festivals, right? LARP festivals. And this is kind of the circuit or the scene that I'm most familiar with. In the past, I have designed sort of environmentally flavored LARPs, or the one LARP. And I've also written about this stuff. So check out my website where I have this article linked. It's in a journal called Analog Game Studies, and it's called Environmental Design in Nordic LARP. And in that LARP, in that article, I also mentioned this game called Other Minds, which is probably particularly interesting to you folks at CNAP because it is about trying to. It's a kind of a challenge of critical anthropomorphization, since you're asked to play an octopus character and to kind of figure out together what octopus culture would look like. And you have to do that without language, right? Without spoken language, and sort of using your sensorium in a very different way, right? So you're blindfolded because octopus, they live at the bottom of the sea, so there's not a lot of light there, usually, and everything is very tactile because they are very tactile creatures. Um, and what's also on the slide is that I'm currently drowning in teaching commitments. So, but I feel like I've already said that, and doesn't make it less true. But yeah, happy to introduce or like to talk about the kind of work that I have going on at the moment. So some of the work that I have done has already sort of come to fruition, or it's I've already been able to kind of to put it out there. The Eco Games book, Felipe, you already mentioned it. I co-edited this book with Joost and Stefan, my colleagues here at Utrecht. And it is available open access, so feel free to have a look. Do use the JSTOR link. The publisher prefers that because that way they can keep count of who downloads versions of the book, I think. And so if you have the time, the introduction to this book is truly massive. I'm very sorry for that. It's like so big, but it is trying to be quite comprehensive. And there is a little sort of introduction inside of the introduction on the topic of non-human play. So that too will be of interest to the folks at CNAP. It's mostly a little bit of a lit review. It's kind of tying together, like kind of giving an overview of some of the writing that's been done on this subject, and identifying different themes. So I think bodies and affectivity is one, animal play is one, and then systems and technology is one. Those are the three themes that I identified. So feel free to check that out as well if you are interested. Now to the topic at hand. So let's indulge in some memories. Last year in the summer in 2023, I was much less busy, and I was cordially invited to sort of spend some time in Innsbruck in Austria on a fellowship. I was invited by Franziska Ascher and Tobias Unterhuber, who work at the department there. And they had invited me, but also two other people, or like kind of we responded to a call, you know how this goes, to spend a month in the city in the summer and to think about empathy games. And I don't quite know why, like it was a little bit random why they chose empathy games as a topic, but I thought, yeah, I can work with this since I am kind of interested in these games that profess to instill empathy in players for non-human creatures. And there's a bunch of those, but some recent ones are, for example, Gibbon, Beyond the Trees, where you play this gibbon and you are, I think you play like a baby gibbon and you get separated from your parents and you get shut up in a cage, and then you have to figure out a way to escape. Or you are a parent of a gibbon like that, or a monkey like that, and then you have to save your baby. Something along those lines. And then there's also Endling, where you play this mother fox who has to take care of her it's 3 on the poster, but I'm pretty sure it's 4 kittens. And you have to do so in a kind of horribly polluted and dangerous landscape. And these, I suppose, you could call our animal empathy games. They, they tackle these sort of like tough subjects, and they kind of they're kind of playing around with what is very academically called bummer vibes, right? These are animals that are games that make invite you to kind of feel bad for animals, I suppose. And there's also this super interesting kind of Earth empathy jam that's on Itch that I looked at when I was in Austria. That too is sort of a project that you can look at trying to figure out like what exactly is understood as empathy here. And so just to kind of catch you up on what we talked about there in Innsbruck, we were largely critical of the notion of an empathy game. And we basically kind of figured out, we figured that Bonnie Ruberg is, if you ask me, has the final word on the subject. So the label empathy game is usually thrown around by games journalism to describe games that are supposedly allow you to walk in someone else's shoes. And often these are pretty depressing games about living under tough circumstances, right? So like you're a mother fox and you have to take care of your babies, and it's really hard and it sucks, and some of the babies are probably going to die, right? It's really sad. These are kind of like tearjerker games, maybe. Um, and the problem with empathy games generally is that they hide, like the label of empathy kind of hides different, more interesting things. So the label is on the one hand kind of empty, like it doesn't mean very much, and then it also means too much, right? It's unclear what exactly is the promise also of empathy games is. It's also unclear that that promise ends up being delivered on, right? So lots of games are labeled as empathy games, when the developers of those games are actually saying, whoa, whoa, that wasn't the point at all. Like, this is not an invitation for you to kind of play this game for an hour and all of a sudden, like, you know what my life is like, right? That's not at all sort of the point of these games, right? And yet that is how they are often sold in the games industry. So Bo Ruberg has some very interesting stuff to say about these empathy games. They write, among other things, that these games, let's see, where's the quote? Okay. Contained within the rhetoric of empathy, or more accurately, passing under the rhetoric of empathy, to borrow a term from discussions of sexuality and race, is a richer set of possible frameworks for challenging dominant notions about which feelings in video games matter and to whom those feelings belong. So, the notion of empathy hides more interesting alternatives. They go on. Out in the open, without the cover of empathy as a catch-all buzzword, sympathy, depth, and allyship become more visible and therefore more accessible for critique. Caring, compassion, sorrow, loss, and queer entanglement are powerful concepts that deserve to be spoken aloud, not lost in the rhetoric of empathy. So these are the alternatives, right? Reference to the title, Empathy and its Alternatives. These alternatives, caring, compassion, sorrow, loss, and queer entanglement, these are exactly the concepts that should be fronted, should be forwarded, because they are the ones that have, according to Ruberg, the most potential for progressive politics. And I suppose, like being kind of unsatisfied with the alternatives that Bo Ruberg suggests there, I thought of another one that might be interesting to look at, and this is so I figured, why not the notion of solidarity games, right? If empathy games is kind of out and uninteresting and kind of it has acquired too much baggage, then maybe we can look at solidarity instead, and to see what we can find there. And this notion of solidarity, or like solidarity games, was sparked initially by the existence of so-called solidarity bundles. So I don't know if you guys are on Itch or on Humble. Yeah, I think it's Humble Games. But there you can often pick up these bundles of games, like 100, 200, 250 games, and the proceeds of that bundle, so you purchase it for what, like $20? The proceeds of that purchase will go to a good cause. So last year I bought a bunch of solidarity bundles, you know, in solidarity for the occupation of Palestine, solidarity with the Ukrainians who have their country invaded, all kinds of, in solidarity with queer oppression in the U.S. So these are solidarity bundles. And then I thought, okay, well, there are also solidarity jams, right? Where people come together and they develop, they create games to sort of indulge, cultivate solidarity with other people. This concept appeals to me more than something like empathy or something like care because of my eco-socialist politics. So I'm really, I think that I'm a sort of like politically kind of agonistic, but also think I believe in coalition building. I believe in equality and compassion, and I think solidarity is a key value and a key kind of tactic in trying to achieve a better world. So this is something that I wanted to look at when I was in Innsbruck. I was very keen on developing the notion of solidarity games. The result was incomplete because in the middle of that month, I had to apply for my job, this job that I have now. And so I couldn't get it finished. However, for the sake of, for this occasion, for this talk, I picked it up again. And this is where it led me. So the picture that you see now is a still from a game called Oikospiel by David Kanaga from 2017. And David Kanaga, if you don't know him, he's kind of like art game creator, and he's famous from doing other titles like Proteus. So this game, Oikospiel, is loosely based on Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Stern and the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And it tells the story of a game development company that is screwed over by the boss and the subsequent organization of a general strike by all the members of the game development crew, as well as other people. And you can see from the image in the game, you have to kind of, so the story is very confusing. You move back and forth in time, and you also have to move through these quite disorienting, janky environments that are populated with very cheap or free assets. And these assets are created in digital sweatshops all over the world. So the game doesn't look very polished. But in this way, the game also wears its politics on its sleeve, right? It's a game that's interested in the labor that goes into making games, specifically cheap and creatively unfulfilling labor. So what stood out to me about Oikospiel, apart from a bunch of other things, I read about this game for my dissertation as well, but there I talk about its kind of engagement with oil and energy. But what stood out to me about the game, for the sake of kind of thinking non-anthropocentrically or thinking about animals, is that it is a world populated by animals because the majority of cheap assets are animals, right? So the game developer game developers in Oikospiel are represented as loyal dogs serving a big boss, DK, Donkey Kong, David Koch, David Kanaga, whatever, the sort of the DK character. And the protagonist, so the character that you kind of play for the most part, is a dog named Pluto, who has to decide where he stands, right? He has to pick a side. Either he's on the side of the big boss, or he sides with his comrades. And the use of animal protagonists here, the use of kind of animals at all in this game, is probably motivated by their ready availability in asset stores. But their number and their variety also tells us something, namely that we like to play with animals, right? Why else would these animals be in the asset stores? And there has been research before on the use of digital assets. Alenda Chang, in her book Playing Nature, has a whole chapter on the non-human where she talks about, for example, plant assets in asset stores. And I guess arguably it would be equally interesting to do a study on animal assets. But why do I bring this game up? Basically because it gives us this beast fable for the modern age about the exploitation of labor and the environment. And in doing so, it primes us to think of animals as workers and of workers as animals. And the next stop is orcas. So I don't know if you guys were kind of online in 2023, but I certainly was. And I really enjoyed this like brief little meme explosion that happened when in 2023, orcas began attacking boats in Europe. If you read the little tweet that's at the center of the slide, orcas have sunk 3 boats in Europe and appear to be teaching others to do the same. Scientists think a traumatized orca initiated the assault on boats after a critical moment of agony, and that the behavior is spreading among the population. And then Louisa, who retweets the quote there on the slide, she says, "It's impossible to overstate how much I am on the orca's side." So Louisa was not the only one to feel this way. Lots and lots of people were like, yes, orcas, right? Lots of people politically aligned with orcas against these people in boats in the Mediterranean. And so a lot of memes were created sort of in showing support of the orcas. And then the little picture there at the bottom of the slide that says, experts say orcas attacking boats are just being playful. That also is really interesting to me because, and I'll get to this a little bit more, but there is often a slippage or kind of like there's often a kind of, there are related terms, right? There is behavior, there is playful behavior, and then there is action and sabotage, right? There's like a kind of gradient of intent that's happening there. Behavior is instinctual. You can't help it. Play is like, well, it's free, right? It's like play is a free action, free behavior, but it could still be quite instinctual or quite kind of in our nature. And then action and sabotage are really, really intentional, right? And so interestingly, when animals act, it's reduced often to behavior or sometimes to play. But when humans act, we can recognize their actions as political actions, even intentional acts of sabotage. But so yeah, I'm saying that there is a kind of like a gradient there, a spectrum that is really interesting to kind of play around with. This is a little closer to home. Obviously, there was a walrus named called Freya who was chilling in the Oslo fjord, and she was chilling a little bit too hard, and people couldn't stay away from her. So the Oslo government decided to shoot her, and so she was killed, and or euthanized, I suppose, as they say. And so this too kind of angered a lot of people, right? A lot of people aligned politically with Freya, right? So kind of following this little story or this little essay that was written by Alexandra Isfahani Hammond, she writes, memes about animal resistance are everywhere and we shouldn't dismiss them too quickly. Right? We shouldn't laugh off rebellious orcas and sea otters. These acts of resistance, and also our own, like the human sort of like expressions of solidarity with animals, they don't mean nothing. Sometimes we ally with animals, and sometimes animals seem to ally with us. An example of that is this dog. He's not even the only dog to do this. Lots of dogs apparently ally with rebels. But Lukanikos was a Greek dog who sort of consistently was present during the anti-austerity riots in Greece. and who fought kind of on the side of the protesters and against the police. So he is sort of presumed or rumored to have died of exposure to tear gas. And as a result, he became this kind of martyr figure. And so apparently in Athens, there are frescoes or wall art commemorating his sacrifice. All right, now to the heart of the matter. What is it called when we align politically with animals? This is called interspecies solidarity. And it is an idea, a goal, a process, an ethical commitment, and a political process. According to Kendra Coulter, who wrote the book on the subject. This is the book, the cover that you can see in the corner of the slide there. Basically, interspecies solidarity, what does it kind of entail? It means that animals are political actors. Animals are also not passive vehicles for pity, and animal resistance is all around us. So when pigs, chickens, cows, and sheep, when they regularly attempt to escape from captivity, we should understand these acts as expressions of desire, specifically the desire for freedom and for a life free from harm. Coulter argues that by acknowledging animals as workers or comrades, while in some cases it makes them more vulnerable because sometimes wild animals have better lives than kind of working animals, it also allows us to fold them into Marxist politics. And similarly, acknowledging animals as stakeholders allows us to fold them into all kinds of governance. For an example, you can Google the political art project Embassy of the North Sea. This is a project that's been trying to kind of do this very concretely. They are for the past, I think, over the course of 4 or 5 years, the first phase was learning to listen, then learning to speak for, and then learning to negotiate with non-human stakeholders in order to create a more inclusive North Sea democracy. It's really fascinating stuff, so check them out. Now, how do we get from empathy to solidarity? So what I think is really interesting about kind of the difference between the two concepts is that solidarity, and this is something that Kendra Coulter argues, and I suppose I agree with it, solidarity cannot remain internalized. What she writes on the slide, solidarity can be felt and thought, but it cannot remain internalized and individualized. Josephine Donovan writes, understanding that an animal is in pain or distress or even empathizing or sympathizing with him or her doesn't ensure, however, that the human will act ethically towards the animal. Thus, the originary emotional empathetic response must be supplemented with a political perspective that enables the human to analyze the situation critically so as to determine who is responsible for the animal's suffering and how that suffering may best be alleviated, right? This is the political perspective, knowing the who is responsible and what to do about it. So I think that in the examples, the orca example that I mentioned, you can sort of tell that if it was just people feeling empathetic with the orcas, right, with orca suffering, then there wouldn't have been such an outcry about it. But what you could see was that people really felt that they needed to claim where they stood in the battle, in the sort of in the conflict. Let me see. It is also solidarity is a concept that sort of acknowledges the agonistic nature of politics, right? You don't just you have solid you don't you stand in solidarity against oppression, against exploitation, and I really value this kind of agonism, right? Learning where people and indeed where non-human beings stand, how our interests differ, and where we can form coalitions is really valuable. And it's something that arguably the notion of empathy doesn't entail. All right, next animal, next up. We're moving to another thinker now. This is Timothy Morton. Um, so I'm going to be quoting some passages from this book, Humankind. There are no page numbers because I'm working with an ebook. Timothy Morton also is kind of a divisive scholar. His writing is very associative, and he often circles around the same material in his work. In his most famous book, arguably Ecology Without Nature, he writes that our reification of nature as something over there, something that exists solely in natural parks or in the fjords and forests of Norway, is getting in the way of our recognition of the fundamental embeddedness of humanity and ecology, which is in fact like all around us. Um, and in Morton's earlier work, recognizing this closeness that we are actually nodes in an ecological network that he calls the mesh, we are always rubbing up against non-human others all the time. For Morton, in his earlier work, this was kind of disturbing, kind of creepy, kind of gothic. And this is a kind of worldview that he called dark ecology, right? Recognizing sort of the closeness of the other, how often uncomfortably close and uncomfortably uncertain we can be about their nature. So this newer book from 2017, Humankind, it retreads a lot of the same material, but it's a kind of a different vibe. So like previous books, it argues that we have to preserve the radical alterity of non-human others and fight the what he calls the Bambification of nature, that is the pacification of nature. Rather, we have to seek out intimacy, which means learning to live with and alongside another that you cannot fully fathom. And so in Humankind, this word intimacy is kind of substituted for a reworked understanding of solidarity. Um, in Humankind, also, this encounter with the other is qualified less as something disturbing than something that is fascinating. And this is kind of a vibe switch that I think is really interesting, and we'll get to it more later. But anyway, the book starts with this introduction, or like this kind of reference to Cecil the lion, who is a lion who was shot dead by a trophy hunting dentist in 2015. And it too caused kind of like a stir online. Just for your information, people got very angry about it. The dentist got a lot of death threats. People rallied behind Cecil, right? People aligned politically with the lion. Timothy Morton writes, dismissing the incident with Cecil is too easy. There was so much more seething under that mob umbrella than just animal rights or sadistic sympathy. Rights have to do with property, and property means you can dispose of it however you like, which is exactly what the dentist had done, once the lion had been determined, by human fiat, of course, to be something to which he could do what he wanted. Pity is condescending in precisely the way William Blake outlined. Pity would be no more if we did not make somebody poor. Sympathy is always a power relationship. This was surely in effect, but so is empathy, which has to do with identification. All right, so there's a lot kind of going on in this paragraph, as you can tell. But it's basically Morton trying to kind of uncover what's going on in this moment where, people ally with the lion, right? So there is definitely kind of a sense of maybe we've been robbed of our property, but there's also other things, right? There is pity with the lion, but there is also sympathy and there is also empathy, right? And empathy, as we've as we I suppose we as I suppose we can know, we can tell, it has to do with identification. So Morton continues, in a dialectical twist, people are now so immiserated that their kinship with non-humans starts to glow through the screen of nature, a construct that since about 10,000 BCE has been the malleable substance of human projects, or its modern upgrade, the screen-like surface onto which humans project their desires. At least some humans are now prepared to drop nature concepts to achieve solidarity with the beings that actually constitute the biosphere. But important to realize, people are now so immiserated that their kinship with non-humans starts to emerge. Then a little bit down the page, Morton argues communist affects are lower than empathy, cheaper and less difficult to access, too easy. The point is to repel downwards through the empathetic part of the capitalist superstructure to find something still more default than empathy, still more default, more common than empathy. The year 2015 was when a very large number of humans, sorry, when a very large number of humans figured out that they had more in common with a lion than with a dentist. All right, so what do I think is interesting about this this example, this sort of like argument that solidarity is cheaper than empathy? Um, Kendra Coulter, right, who we've talked about before, she writes that solidarity emerges when empathy is combined with a political perspective, right, political insight. But Morton writes that solidarity is more basic, but that it is related to empathy. And it's always hard to understand, but I'm super interested in kind of unpacking this a little bit because I think there might be something to it, right? Empathy games or empathy games specifically, they have to work really hard at generating empathy, right? It's kind of like hard to create a story that really gets you to kind of feel bad or like feel kind of emotionally invested in a character. Um, but in a case like Cecil the Lion, or in the case of the orcas, solidarity is just there, right? It emerges much more spontaneously. And I'm kind of wondering if this is what Morton means when he argues that solidarity is more basic, more common, cheaper than empathy. And I think there's reasons why solidarity emerges maybe more spontaneously. On the one hand, solidarity can be empowering. We love a story about an underdog, and not just because we love dogs. We like to, right? I think perhaps, like I said before, this idea of solidarity, it speaks to the kind of the natural agonism of politics, the fact that we like to rally with those who are punching up. We like to kind of rally with a team against an oppressor. Um, and it is also kind of an economy of pleasure, right? Like standing in solidarity with those orcas means also taking pleasure in the acts, the sort of destructive acts of the orcas. It means going, yeah, fuck yeah, like they did it. And that's a very different kind of feeling, a very different sentiment than feeling bad for a creature. But this kind of human line solidarity, or this solidarity generally still relies on commonality. So the bigger question then there is, can you have solidarity without commonality? That's an open question. I'm not sure that we can get to it later. Still talking about Morton, because the book is called Humankind, right? Solidarity for non-human people. So what about kindness is important? So Morton writes, kindness means including non-humans in our social designs, not because it's nice or because we need to condescend to things and make them ersatz, humans with rights, not for any reason involving good or evil at all, because that's an artifact of agricultural age religion. We need to include non-humans because it's fascinating, because we can't help it, because we know too much. We're not trying to be kind. It's that this is our kindness, in the sense that this is how we are. We want to be maximum chameleons. Or in other words, fascination is the aesthetic gravitational pull of entities toward one another, the dynamics of solidarity within a force field-like matrix of sensitivities. This too kind of explains what Morton means when he says that solidarity is cheaper than empathy, right? We sort of are naturally, I suppose, like attuned to animals. Like we think animals are interesting or fascinating. You see this with little kids all the time. Kids sort of grow up, I suppose, almost naturally thinking that animals are cool or neat. I don't know how much of that is nature or nurture, but it's certainly something that that is observable, right? A lot of like children's media involves animals, animal protagonists. So there is a sort of natural, a kind of like a common, a cheap, a basic interest in non-humans that can be exploited, right? Or that can be used to fuel fascination and thus solidarity. Or I guess like fascination fuels solidarity. Um, all right, this is my last Morton slide, don't you worry. This is from the last chapter of the book, which Morton opens to a reference of a little picture book called um, Fly Away Peter, which is about a short-necked giraffe who befriends a bird who can't fly. So they're both kind of like failed animals, but they find each other and they play games together. And I think that's telling, right? I think it's telling that at the end of the book, Morton sort of like alludes to the possibility of interspecies play. What else? Okay, so Timothy Morton writes, human kindness goes beyond tolerance, which is based on an emotional economy of need to appreciation, appreciation for no reason based on an emotional economy of desire, or of allowing other beings to have pleasure. For some reason, this part of your house is where sparrows, not you, get to have fun, but you get to have fun by appreciating the sparrow fun. You become fascinated by enhancing and expanding non-human pleasure modes. Continuing. In this way, vegetarianism, for example, is not about opposing cruelty or minimizing suffering or enhancing one's health by returning to a more natural way of eating, but about a pleasure mode designed to maintain or enhance the pleasure modes of pigs or cows or sheep and so on. The point would not be to create a society where pigs no longer existed, but one which actually existing pigs get to enjoy themselves more to go about their piggy business. I think this is really kind of fruitful or kind of interesting stuff because I think it's really cool to think about sort of fascination being fueled by this practice of enhancing and expanding non-human pleasure modes, right? And I also really like the sort of reference to vicarious play here. It's not, you don't have to be involved, you don't have to be like playing with animals to enjoy the fact that animals play. And uh, I think this is quite common. I think a lot of us enjoy watching creatures play. And once again, I want to kind of like underscore the vibe change, if you will, right? Interacting with non-human others, no longer, or like Morton is no longer emphasizing this as a source of discomfort, but as a source of fascination. Vicarious play. I feel like we all see this. My favorite little expression in Dutch, which apparently also exists in English and German, is ik wou dat ik twee hondjes was, dan kon ik samen spelen. Or I wish I was two dogs, then I could play together. It's quite, I feel like this is, I mean, it's hard to find the origin for this text, which tells you how old it is, but it also tells you how kind of relatable this is, right? To kind of, to enjoy watching the two creatures play without yourself actually having to be involved. Now for a little bit of a pig tangent, because we kind of left the other slide with expanding non-human modes of pleasure and letting pigs get up to their piggy business. So there are lots of games with pigs. In the Middle Ages, people played very ostensibly kind of abusive games with pigs, but in fact, it turns out there's something about playing with animals that levels anthropocentric hierarchies. And for those of you, I mean, I cover a lot of the stuff in the Eco Games book, so feel free to look it up there. But I'm highlighting this example specifically because it is an example of enrichment, which is something that I'll go on to talk about at the very end there. So this is a game that's designed in the Netherlands. It's basically European law states that pigs need to be kept in pens that have enrichment, because pigs are very clever, they're very inquisitive, so you have to keep them occupied, their minds, otherwise they start tearing each other apart, basically. And this was a game that was designed to be played by pigs and humans together, right? So the pigs have a kind of screen in their pen, and the humans have a tablet, and humans are moving a little thing of light across the screen in the pen. And if they can persuade pigs to follow along the little marker with their nose, then both players are rewarded with a colorful light display. So I think this is a really kind of interesting experiment, because playing with pigs as our peers, right? Even though this is a game that's still implicit in the what I think is the horrible industry of factory farming. It's engaging pigs as peers. It's kind of putting links, like we have our fingers and thumbs, but pigs have these noses that are just as sensitive and just as kind of like good at kind of working, just to sort of like yeah, just as sort of good at playing games with, I guess. So feel free to check out this example. Um, so the pig chase is an example of expanding non-human pleasure modes within the confines of factory farming still. But there are other designers and philosophers and artists who are kind of working on this subject, trying to expand non-human pleasure modes. And Michelle Westerlaken is a design scholar who has been working on this for quite a bit. And she has this terrific article that's called "Designing Games for and with Non-Humans," where she kind of goes even a little bit further than Pig Chase. I mean, Pig Chase was designed for pigs, but not necessarily with pigs. But Michelle Westerlaken is doing this kind of experimental artistic design, where she designs for and with animals. So in this specific case that's on the screen there, she designs toys for dogs. And she has this great quote that I lifted from the article. The fundamental chasm between humans and other species might raise the question of how, if ever, we could sufficiently understand animals to make appropriate and desirable design choices for them. Posed in that way, the question is in itself anthropocentric, and as it presumes that it is the role and responsibility of the human designer to meaningfully shape the actions and experiences of both the humans and the non-humans that are involved in the interaction. So, right, we shouldn't just be designing for, we should be designing for and with, right? Because it's basically saying, open our eyes, open our ears. We can listen. We can kind of listen to the ways that animals communicate with us, their own desires and their own concerns and anxieties. And so Michelle Westerlaken has written a lot of other work, kind of trying to imagine what the world would look like if we had designed it with also non-human users in mind. And these are just some examples that came to me. In the Netherlands, you have a lot of these ecoducts, mostly because the Netherlands is covered in highway. But these are bridges designed for animals, right, to kind of link up biomes. And in the upper right corner is a insect hotel. This is obviously kind of an example of non-human architecture, right? This is a little house, a little shelter designed for insects. So I dropped this term earlier, enrichment, and it's maybe my latest obsession, because I think enrichment is really cool. It's obviously what was happening in the pig pen with Pig Chase and Michelle designing games for her dogs. These are examples of enrichment. It's also a kind of more concrete practice that zookeepers are engaged with, because they have to obviously, for the psychological and physical health of the animals that are in their custody. They have to keep challenging these animals. They have to enrich their captive lives. But what I think is really cool about enrichment is that I'm on Tumblr sometimes, and on Tumblr, lots of humans also talk about their own lives in terms of enrichment. So this is just a kind of couple of screen grabs. Up in the left corner there, this user posts, "I don't have an attitude problem. I just need more enrichment toys in my enclosure." Or right underneath there, "Frankly embarrassing how easily my agonies are assuaged by a 1-2 punch of getting high and watching slime scooping videos on TikTok, like the self-care version of a zookeeper giving a gorilla a tire full of peanut butter for enrichment." Um, right, what's going on here? On the one hand, enrichment is something that humans provide for animals. On the other hand, humans, or some humans, can frame or figure their social media feeds as enrichments, and then by extension, social media as their cages, right? So these people are kind of stuck online, or like stuck in modern culture, stuck in their jobs they don't like, just stuck generally. And these videos that they come across, or sort of these like little, I don't know, little ways of coping that they have adopted, these are forms of enrichment. So this term might be kind of mutual, right? Enrichment is mutual. We enrich the lives of animal creatures. Very often we film that material, and that material ends up on our social media feeds, and it enriches our lives, right? Because we experience vicarious pleasure um, through that. Enrichment also entails understanding ourselves as animals, right? So all of these posters on Tumblr, they understand themselves as animals with needs, with bodies, with impulses, and indeed animals that are stuck in cages of their own. Another interesting and probably famous example of enrichment is Rat Park. There's a great comic book version, or like comic, that explains the experiments. But for the sake of time, I think I'll skip here, because I'm coming up to my conclusion. This image on the slide that you see now is a kind of artwork or experiment by a person called Laura Bissell, who was part of this sort of location-based kind of research motivated or research-oriented series of experiments with a wild beaver population. And Laura Bissell's contribution to that project entailed trying to kind of find ways to play with these beavers, open-ended ways of playing with these beavers, right? Offerings of play, offerings that are able to be rejected as well, right? So kind of non-coercive forms of inviting creatures to play. And so this is an example of that. It's just pieces of apple on a stick that the beavers in the nighttime are invited to snack on. So yeah, kind of wrapping up the talk, we've come a long way from talking about solidarity as this pretty concrete socialist sensibility. For Kendra Coulter, interspecies solidarity emerges when empathy meets politics, and then it motivates people to take up arms and to pick a side in the conflict. And then for Timothy Morton, solidarity is more related to intimacy and proximity, but it is also cheaper than empathy and more common. And it's a sentiment that is fueled by fascination, which is part of human nature, our kindness. So how do we cultivate fascination? Through play, specifically the kind of non-anthropocentric play that I want to call enrichment. And this is enrichment is just a kind of example of what Morton calls expanding non-human modes of pleasure. But I prefer enrichment for brevity and because I think enrichment is interestingly mutual. But arguably, we've kind of lost track of the politics a little, which often happens when you follow Timothy Morton's line of thinking, because he is, after all, a romanticist, and his politics are a little bit individualist. So, my concluding remarks, I'm looking for the politics of enrichment. And these are just some thoughts that I have. For example, there is always a kind of like politics involved in the interpretation of a non-human response, right? If you provide enrichment for a creature and the creature does not engage with it, then you can say, oh, I've tried, or like this doesn't work, or whatever. But there's a kind of politics there in there as well, in sort of in your interpretation, right? Sometimes you might some I don't know, some answers might come to you too easily, and you have to kind of keep digging really to get to the core, or you can be kind of blind to the kinds of language that animals use to communicate their desires and concerns. So that's something to be on the lookout for. And then I'm also interested in sort of finding, or kind of investigating, I suppose, the mutualism of enrichment, right? Like I said before, enrichment is pleasurable for us because we have this, we can sort of like vicariously enjoy play, but enrichment is also beneficial for animals. But sometimes it might be more enjoyable for us and less enjoyable for animals. So there's a kind of politics there involved in balancing out and making sure that both parties are enjoying themselves equally. And then, of course, there's always the task of exposing agonism, right? Exposing partiality, exposing conflict, who stands to benefit from what, who is being left out, who's being excluded. That is also sort of a matter of politics, right? So the politics of enrichment would also involve trying to figure out whether we're playing inclusively or not. I see that I've spoken for about an hour, which I think is where I'll leave it. So I'm very curious to hear what you guys thought and whether you guys have questions, comments, feedback. I am interested in, if I have the time, everything can happen if I have the time. If I have the time, I want to write this up and I don't know, find a sort of more find a way to settle these thoughts in an article or a little I don't know, in some some shape or form. So I'd be very happy if maybe you guys could help me out with that. Thank you for listening.